Hey guys, today I'll share with you a fun system that I only just discovered very recently, but it's been played in a lot of games by Aleksandr Shimanov, the Russian Grandmaster, in some games on chess.com, in their Tile Tuesdays, their rapid events and such. And that is the system of Queen e5, which at first glance just looks completely ridiculous, but when I was researching it for a Lead Chess article very recently, I noticed that this Bishop g4 has actually been scoring quite well for black in the Lead Chess opening book, believe it or not. And the idea of Bishop g4 is basically that after d4, takes, and Queen a5. On the one hand here, you're playing essentially a Scandinavian with free Queen a5. So, like this, where white got in basically the moves like knight g2 and d4 for free in comparison. On the other hand, it's also not quite that simple because also the white knight on e2 is not the most actively placed. It struggles a little bit to find a great square. And also black can sort of just play a very solid set, potentially like with e6, knight c6, bishop e7, long castles. And the fact that white has betrayed off his normally bad bishop on c8 means that he has quite a sound and reliable position if he can complete development. By the way, if you are enjoying these videos, do make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now, in my article on Lead Chess, I actually point out that the move b4 is quite a strong one for white, trying to either get the rook in the attack down the b file, or, in the case of queen h5, play a move like f3 and, continuing to harass the black queen as such. And that will definitely give white a very pleasant advantage, but, of course, when you play these sort of systems as black, you're not really trying to equalize out the opening, but you're just trying to avoid fury, maybe catch out the opponent. Because I notice even with very strong players, they will often start making mistakes as soon as you take them out of book. And that's what we see here in this game by Vitiugov against Shimanov, where, believe it or not, after the natural bishop f4, black has already got a fully equal position. How exactly, you may be wondering? Well, we go knight c6, and then we castle long, and put the pressure against the d4 pawn. Already moves like e5 are, in the mix. Maybe not immediately because of queen f5, but say if we were to move the king to b8 or the queen h5 first, then definitely e5 would be a serious idea. White plays move a3, and when you have the castling on opposite flanks, it definitely makes sense for both sides to charge the pawns in front of their respective kings. So b4, queen to h5, and after queen e3, I think white played is probably trying to avoid some g5 and black doing a similar pawn storm to white's b4. But queen e3 actually loses the initiative a little bit, and it is probably better, to develop, push your pawn storm forward, and just try to attack. I mean, black will go g5. Black definitely gets his chances as well, but I don't think that, black is better. Let's put it this way. I show you queen g6 is a funny move. You can sort of double the pawns, but the doubling of pawns would actually help black because your rook gets active, and the pawn on d4 also gets progressively weaker as you trade off more of the pieces in the Scandinavian. So white goes queen e3. Black plays bishop d6, again, remembering the principle I just mentioned, that the exchange of pieces generally favors black in the Scandinavian, due to white having a space advantage. Well, if enough pieces get traded, may all be a space disadvantage. After h3, which is sort of aimed against knight g4 ideas, black plays bishop f4, queen f4, and it's really quite impressive how Shimanov just outplays a 2700 plus GM, and I believe Vitiugov is also a former Russian champion as well, so it makes it all the more impressive to, beat him in a seemingly easy way. After rook d3, well, in this position, black found the second best move, playing the move e5. Turns out we actually have a little tactic that you could play to move knight takes d4, and then the move e5, and that would actually just win a pawn in this case with the fork. Note that queen f5 doesn't really do anything because, our queen is defended by the knight, so it would just be an exchange of queens. Black plays e5 instead, which still gives a pretty big advantage. After d5, queen takes e5, queen to c4. We see in the game that white is still stuck with this weak pawn on d3. And, okay, in the subsequent course game, it was mainly a blitz game, so I'm not going to go through, every single move. I think that at this point, a move like knight d5 would be quite logical, just blockading the d3 pawn, and even a move like knight d4 is actually very interesting as well, with the idea that we are just happy to exchange off some pieces as the queens come off. The pawn just gets progressively weaker in the endgame. We can try to attack it with moves like knight d7 to e5. Maybe not immediately, because they do have king f1, e2 to defend in time, but you could definitely go rook d6 and start to annoy white in different ways. The pawn on a3 is another pawn that could also be a little bit of a sore point in this case. So black definitely have very good winning chances. In the game, basically Shimanov played queen e7, which does lose some of the advantage. Like, letting the white pawn get to d5 is definitely not what you want. It's much better to fix the pawn in place on d4 or d3. So I mean, at this point, white is more or less doing okay, but black still went on to win the game anyway after further adventures typical of blitz and rapid chess. But for now, this is definitely enough to sort of show us our weapon of queen e5 and bishop g4, which I hereby call the Shimanov variation. Also, by the way, if you do face one of the alternatives, let's say, if white does play knight g2 instead, then you can play it a similar way with knight f6, d4, queen a5. And granted, if white plays a move like g3, this setup of bishop g2, knight 2 is fairly harmonious, but the position remains quite playable for black as well. For example, you can play c6, bishop to g2, and play, bishop to f5, and just have quite a normal position where, white is slightly better, but of course, black can play, and it's, at the very least not worse than the most dangerous lines in the Scandinavian from black's point of view. And if they do play queen e2, offering a trade of queens, I would just swap and, just be very happy to have got an equal endgame right out of the opening, where you can just play knight f6, and there are a lot of fine setups. I mean, c6, bishop f5, you can't really go too far wrong with the normal, Scandinavian style setup with, with this sort of thing, c6, knight f3, bishop f5, and already white has to play some slightly awkward moves to keep the c2 pawn defended, while you can just play your normal setup and love life. It's very hard for white to really make use of his lead development in these positions without the queens on the board, just as a general principle. So yeah, that's how you play queen e5 against Scandinavian. Of course, it's probably not going to work against Magnus Carlsen in Classical, but certainly in Blitz it can be a fun system where you don't have to study any theory, and if your opponent's a strong GM, it will probably catch him out a little bit. So I wish you luck with playing it, and if you do want to play the strongest Scandinavian rather than these sort of random sidelines, you can definitely check out my course, Play the Strongest Scandinavian. It's on a little bit of a discount at the moment, so click link in the description for more details there. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, take care.